سلام دوباره بر شما دوستان آشنایان. تشکر از حضور شما در این برنامه گفتگوی امروز 11 فروردین و ما یه مقدار اخبار، یه مقدار اطلاعات دیگه داشتیم که برنامه ها یه ذره تو هم ریخت به علت بعضی از کمبودهایی که در این دستگاه ها بود، ولی خب ما اینو بهانه نمی کنیم و حالا گفتیم به اینا که اینا حتما اینو درستش کنن که هفته دیگه انشالله وقتی که اجازه دادید خدمتتون برسیم این مشکلات رو نداشته باشیم انشالله الرحمن. و یک برنامه ای هستش که اینها معمولا راجع به اطلاعات جاهای دیگه مختلف صحبت میکنن به نام دموکراسی نه که مجریش یک یهودیه، منتها خب ایمی گودمن نامی هستش و اینها سعی میکنن در یک توازنی بیان صحبت بکنن. البته خب ما عقایدمون این هستش که قوم بنی اسرائیلی که از به وسیله حضرت موسی علیه السلام از مصر آزاد شدن، اینها نوادگان یعقوب بودن که یوسف که یکی از پسرهای حضرت یعقوب علیه السلام بودن گرفتار شده بودن، آورده بودن شده مصر و اونجا کاری شده بودن. بعد در این میون که ایشون به یک مرحله بالایی رسیده بودن، حالا چه شده چه نشده، چرا این افراد معمولا مورد غضب و نفرت اطرافیان می شدن نمیدونم. اینو همینقدر که در زمان فرعون بوده که یکی از این فرعون ها بوده که حضرت موسی علیه السلام در دربار فرعون بزرگ میشه و اینها همش خواست الله سبحانه و تعالی بوده. اینها بالاخره انقدر چیز میکنن که فرعون اجازه میده که اینا برن و اینها بالاخره مصر رو ترک میکنن و میان به اون جایی که حضرت الله سبحانه و تعالی و حضرت موسی علیه السلام گفته بودن برید. اینا میان. از اون موقع تا حالا اینها باز دوباره هر جا که رفتن مشکل ایجاد کردن. چرا مشکل ایجاد کردن، چرا نکردن، او رو من نمیدونم. همینقدر میدونم که اینا هیچ وقت یه حالت آرامی نداشتن و همیشه مورد تهاجم اطرافیان بودن، چه در زمان حضرت عیسی بوده، چه در زمان گذشته بوده، چه زمان همین فرعون بود و بعدم که میان بیرون به اروپا هم همینطور به اینا چیز میشه. بعد میان آمریکا. بالاخره هر جای دنیا اینا میرن یه مشکلی ایجاد میکنن، یه مشکلاتی هستش که با اینها میاد همراه و مثل که میگن تو چیز ما در زبان ما میگن تو پیشونیش نوشته شده، که تو پیشونیش اینا نوشته شده که حتما باید مردم از شما بدشون بیاد و اینها یه حالتهایی برای خودشون پیدا میکنن. از حالت روانی هستش که یه حالتی هستش که همیشه فکر میکنن یکی قرار اینا رو بگیره و یه کاری بکنه، در مقابل اون اینها عکس العملی از خودشون نشون میدن و بزرگترین رمانسازها یا کتاب نویسایی که از خودشون حرف در میارن همینا هستن و رمان‌های خیلی درست میکنن، کتاب‌هایی می‌نویسن و در ضمن یه محلی که در زمان بعد از جنگ اول جهانی شروع شد پایه گرفتن در کالیفرنیا، یه جایی به نام هالیوود بهش میگن، اونجا بودن که اینا دونه دونه اومدن و بساط خودش رو پهن کردن و شرکت‌های کوچیکی بودن، بعد یواش یواش بزرگتر شدن و خلاصه تا جایی که یک رسانه عظیمی در دنیا ایجاد کردن که در این رسانه جز فساد چیزی دیگه ترویج نمیشه و این فساد طوری ترویج میشه که منی که سنی ازم گذشته من هم غافل میشم، من هم تو دام میفتم، من هم گمراه میشم، چه برسه به جوانهایی که بالاخره اینها اطلاعاتی ندارن و نمیدونن که این افراد چطوری دارن این عقاید و گفته‌های خودشون رو دارن تو مردم پخش میکنن. اجازه بدید این صحبت‌های اینها رو گوش بکنیم با هم. بسم الله.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Al Jazeera has released a video showing Israeli soldiers fatally shooting 2 unarmed Palestinians near Gaza City, then burying their bodies with a bulldozer. One of the men can be seen waving a piece of white fabric before they shoot him dead. Indiscriminate Israeli attacks continued throughout the Gaza Strip Wednesday. Musa Dahir lost his parents in an Israeli airstrike on Rafah.
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I can't make sense of what happened. My parents, my father with his displaced friends who came from Gaza near the industrial area and were staying with him. They were all together when suddenly they were all gone like dust. They fled from one death and came to another. If the Security Council issues another resolution, they will hit more. For God's sake, do not pass more resolutions. That's enough. Every time they pass a resolution, they hit us more. We're all dying. My parents last night. We will be tomorrow. Others will follow. We're all on the way to death.
The Israeli raid and siege on Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City is now in its 10th day. The rights group Euromed Human Rights Monitor says at least 13 children have been killed by Israeli forces in and near Al-Shifa since the raid started. Meanwhile, local media is reporting Palestinian journalist Mohammed Abu Sakhil was shot and killed at Al-Shifa Hospital. In related news, the Palestine Red Crescent says Israel recently released 7 of its members who were detained on the raid on Al-Amal Hospital in February. The health workers, who included the director of ambulance and emergency services in Gaza, spent 47 days in prison. 8 other Red Crescent staffers are still being held. This comes as UNRWA said 171 of its workers have now been killed in Gaza. The death toll there since October 7th has now topped 32,500, including 14,000 children. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces killed at least 4 Palestinians Wednesday. 3 of them were killed in an overnight air raid.
I started screaming and my nephew was with me. I was calling for an ambulance or a car and calling on the people to come and help us to move bodies from the ground. People came to help because the ambulance was late because the checkpoint was closed. We carried Hamza and he was still breathing, but when we reached the ambulance, he died.
The Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 450 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th. Another 4,700 have been wounded. Over 7,300 have been detained. Also in the occupied West Bank, the Israeli human rights group Looking the Occupation in the Eye said a shooting attack on a highway near the town of Al-Auja injured 2 of its activists. They were reportedly on their way to help Palestinian shepherds. A 13-year-old Israeli boy was also injured. Here in the U.S., another State Department official has publicly resigned over the Biden administration's support for Israel. Anel Sheline was a foreign affairs officer in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor who focused on promoting human rights in the Middle East and North Africa. In a piece for CNN, she writes, quote, "Whatever credibility the United States had as an advocate for human rights has almost entirely vanished since the war began." Anel Sheline will be joining us later in the broadcast. The president of the Center for American Progress, Patrick Gaspard, who is also a longtime Democratic insider and former U.S. ambassador to South Africa, blasted the Biden administration's defense of Israel's actions in Gaza. Gaspard's comments came after State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller told reporters this week the U.S. believes Israel's complying with international law. Gaspard said Miller's statement is, quote, a gross disregard of overwhelming evidence and a dangerous precedent in the conduct of U.S. foreign policy. Meanwhile, the White House says it's working with Israel to reschedule a date for a D.C. visit by an Israeli delegation to discuss the planned invasion of Rafah. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had previously canceled the meeting after the U.S. refused to veto a UN Security Council ceasefire resolution. Elsewhere, Ireland says it'll intervene in South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. The Irish Foreign Minister, Michael Martin, said Israel's actions in Gaza constitute a, quote, blatant violation of international humanitarian law on a mass scale. In Jordan, police continue to crack down on thousands of protesters who've been demonstrating near the Israeli embassy in Amman for 3 days. Protesters could be heard chanting betrayal as they call on Jordan to cancel its deals with Israel.
Our message has been a message of the Jordanian popular movement since the beginning of October 7th and before that. We are asking the Jordanian government to cancel the Wadi Araba peace treaty with Israel and all its annexes that we believe harm Jordanian national interests. This requires us to stand with the choices of the Palestinian people who are facing an aggression by the Zionist entity, the American administration, and the European West.
In Baltimore, rescue workers recovered the bodies of 2 victims of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. The men were identified as 35-year-old Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes, originally from Mexico, and 26-year-old Dorlian Roniel Castillo Cabrera from Guatemala. Another 4 workers are still missing and presumed dead in the river. All 6 victims were immigrant overnight construction workers.
اجازه بفرمایید چند لحظه ما باز دوباره بریم و برگردیم. انشالله خیر باشه برای همه. لا اله الا الله لا اله الا الله 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 لا اله الا الله لا اله الا الله ایران 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 رنگار مسلسل ها ایران 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 رنگار مسلسل ها ایران 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 کشته شده بر حیوان کشته شده بر